My job was to lay out the project, which I did in '67, talk to all of the ARPA PIs at our annual meeting in '67, and explained what I wanted to do, and that they all should be connected in their computers. All of them said no, because they didn't want to lose computer time to everybody else. Within a year, that all changed. Leonard Klenrock wrote his book on network theory in '64, and I had that book, and he had worked a lot on all parts of the network theory of how you might do topology, how you might do packets. And he wrote up all that very effectively, and so I knew that it would work.
So Larry called together a number of researchers in 1967, got us all in the room. Wes Clark was there, and he said, look, if you guys are going to create a network with all this communications overhead, don't load up the computers with that effort. Create special computers that sit alongside the main machines and let all the communications work run on that switch, if you will. A request for proposal was created, which went out to industry. Among those who responded was Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, and they responded with a terrific proposal. They actually began to design the network in their proposal. The work there was supervised by Frank Hart. Bob Kahn was the system designer. People like Severe Ornstein, Dave Walden, Willie Crowder, a number of others were all involved in putting together a really powerful proposal.
BBN's proposal was Frank running it and everybody else working for him, one level, basically. And that was much more attractive, to go with somebody who could work it quickly and not have all of the up and down management. And given their proposal, which was also saying all the right things, I thought that that was the best strategy.
We weren't just simply saying, yes, we can do A, we can do B, we can do C. We did a complete system design. Then when we got the contract, in effect, we were doing a redesign already. And then you have to implement. And of course, during implementation, you design some more, which I do believe is part of the reason that it all more or less worked by September 1969, when we shipped the first machine to UCLA.
When I heard the name of this next panel, Breakthrough Disruptions, I thought, wow, that's the part of move fast and break things that's actually worked. So we'll find out what that is. And the woman who's going to find out for us is Ellen Levy. She's the moderator of this panel. She knows the ins and outs of Silicon Valley because she directs Silicon Valley Connect. It's a kind of matchmaking outfit for investors and organizations and great ideas. And it's also the connective tissue between Silicon Valley and everyone else, and that's a tough job of translating. She will do some tough work here today with her panelists, and please welcome all of them on stage.
Well, it's such an honor to be here today as we celebrate not only the launch of the internet 50 years ago today here at UCLA, but as we are celebrating it with so many of the people who were instrumental in doing that here in the audience and on stage. If that weren't awe-inspiring enough, I have to admit on a personal level, it might have been a little bit daunting to think about introducing this next panel that I'm going to bring up on stage here in a minute, had I not remembered a really savvy bit of business advice or observation that a friend of mine told me years ago that seemed particularly relevant today. She said, you know, Ellen, sometimes it doesn't matter if the jockey's on backwards if the horse is strong enough. So what I'm going to do is pretty much jump right to the chase and bring out my panel one at a time. And as you've probably noticed, none of them really need an introduction. So what I'm going to try to do is highlight some of the perspective that they're going to bring to the conversation as we talk about some of the breakthrough disruptions that we can look forward to and also that we want to be prepared for going forward. So our first panelist is Preethi Kasireddy. She's recently become a technology founder, but she'll be drawing on experience from a broad array of background experience, such as working at Goldman Sachs, at technology investment firm Andreessen Horowitz, and even spending some time in an operating role at Coinbase before her current job as a founder and CEO of TruStory. Our next panelist is Meg Whitman. She will be bringing an unbelievable perspective through her serial leadership of organizations ranging from HP to when she took eBay from a fledgling company through hyper growth and all the challenges that that entails, and on to being one of the most iconic internet companies we have today. I should also mention, and along the way, deciding she would run for governor of California, what was it, a decade ago now. So we'll be hearing that perspective. The next person I'd like to welcome is Ashton Kutcher, obviously known as a renowned actor. But I suspect we'll be learning a lot from his years of experience, not only investing in, but also advising technology startups, really setting out to make a difference. Why are they laughing at you already? And the other thing I think is equally important is he's probably going to reflect a bit on his experience from having founded the nonprofit Thorn, which is using technology to really go after some of the worst societal ills that we have, and maybe being a kind of a shining light for what we can be thinking about for future breakthroughs. Following Ashton, we have Mark Cuban, again. I am trying my best to keep the introductions to one line. Mark is a serial entrepreneur, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and a prolific investor in companies that look promising and can be disruptive both on and off of TV. And last, but certainly not least, is Bud Tribble. He's a technologist and scientist who for decades has been almost prescient in where he's decided to spend his time working on some fundamental technologies we all benefit from today, starting with his role leading the software team that eventually helped launch the original Macintosh, and all the way fast forward to today where he's the vice president of software technology at Apple. So thank you everybody for joining me. What I wanted to do to start is, as we take on this topic of breakthrough disruption, it made me think back to when I was just jumping into my career post-graduate school, and it was the mid-90s, and the consumer internet was taking off. And if any one of you had been asking me, what do you think a breakthrough technology or breakthrough disruption is going to be, I wouldn't have thought that there were a lot of variables. I would have assumed you meant a technology, and I would have assumed that it was going to be a positive thing, as when we say disruption. And yet, in today's world, I think we're seeing that there's a lot more to it. We've learned a lot over the last 50 years, but what it means, and what I'm hoping we can start with, is let's go up a level and say, first of all, where do we think those disruptions will come from? Is it going to be business model changes? Is it going to be things that we do just to accommodate massive societal issues going on? Climate change being one of them. But we have aging populations. We have all kinds of issues that may force us to focus, even just with the technology we have. Or will it be political, regulatory, compliance issues? And so first, take a moment and say, where do you think it will come from? Is it technology? Will it be AI and quantum? So when somebody 20 years from now is describing the next disruption we've seen, what will they lead with? Will it be a conversation around technology or some of these other issues? So maybe I'll throw it open to a discussion. This is where you can pick kind of your passion area of what do you think is really the current top-of-mind issue?
I mean, all the above?
All right, well, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people here, so we can start working through them. But let's start to highlight where you think those disruptions
Well,
are
I mean, if you believe in climate change, then if we don't solve it, none of those things matter, right?
Yep.
And so I don't think we can effectively depend on governments to find solutions, political solutions or regulatory solutions. So I think it's going to take technology and things like, carbon capture and sequestration and, technologies in that realm that have to work, and we have to invest in them, and hopefully, we'll start taking the mission of not just investing in individual companies, but doing it as a country and for the entire world. Because if we don't get that right, then, as I said, none of the other stuff matters.
Got it. And to the extent that you've been looking at some of these, do you feel like technology has a lead in this? Do we have?
Yeah, I guess the good news is it can happen. Right? And the question right now isn't about can we do it, at least, and I'm not the expert in just reading and trying to keep up and looking for opportunities. The question isn't can we do it, the question is what's the cost? And if the question is just what's the cost, well, that's a good thing, right? Because at some point you get desperate enough to realize there is no cost that's too much. But I think it's also going to follow the traditional technological curve where it'll become more effective at a lower cost over time. So hopefully we can do it soon enough and well enough that the kids here all benefit from it.
Got it. Yeah, Meg.
So I would say, if I had to just say one, because I
and
agree
of
with
course
Mark,
they're all
it would be all of them.
right?
But I would say actually data. that the amount of data that is being collected, the ingestion of that data, the analysis of that data, and what it can do to be very positive. I think part of climate change is solved through the analysis of data. I think there's great social ills that can be solved through the aggregation and ingestion and analysis of data. But I think there's also the dark side of, I think in 10 or 20 years, we will not recognize social interactions. We will not recognize what the government in other countries and maybe even here knows about us and what they do with that data. But think about the derivative of the data is the compute power that's required to analyze this data. And whether it's quantum or simply supercomputers, I think that's a huge disruptive force.
I'm going to say crypto because I'm a crypto nerd. I do crypto day in and day out. And I think oftentimes you'll hear people talk about crypto and it's still very abstract today, and to be honest, like the future of crypto probably won't come, or the theoretical dream future of crypto probably won't come for another 20, 30, 50 years. But I think crypto fundamentally impacts like a lot of things, whether it's business model, politics, governance, just like everything across the board. And so it's like this like blanket revolutionary change in how humans behave and interact with each other. So personally, like for example, I think one thing that people don't really understand about the crypto is that it's fundamentally changing how humans interact. So when me and you interact, every day we're interacting with people and we exchange value in that process. And there was no way before to kind of add a layer of value exchange, and crypto does that. Like, so if I like that you smiled at me, I can send you crypto. Like, I can imagine a future where that exists. Or if I like the fact that you have a pretty dress, like, I'll send you crypto. Whatever it is, like, we're always exchanging value, and I think crypto creates that layer finally for us to exchange value and goods and services directly instead of going through all these intermediaries to exchange that value.
And can you say one more sentence on, so what do you think that does for the way people are using the internet and the behaviors that we've seen in the past or that we're trying to now see in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think the internet was supposed to have money built into it, but Brendan and I only had like 9 days to build like all this, so the first browser and stuff. So the internet never had money, but it should have had money. And so how we'll see the internet evolve is, like right now, I think a lot of the businesses on the internet, especially social networks, are built in with very perverse incentives where because there's no direct value transfer, they have to make money in other ways, and so advertisers selling data. Whereas now, people can actually directly exchange value on the internet with one another, so there's no need for all these like perverse incentives just to make money.
I can also add, if you like my shoes or my smile, you can Venmo me at
Yeah, actually, it's a good joke, but the question is this a good thing?
MCUBAN. And I promise to spend it appropriately.
Yeah, but
then you have to pay a fee to Venmo, right?
I'm okay with that because they're sent, no, but I get the point.
Well, I liked your intro asking us to sort of take it up a level, because I actually think that the technology around the internet is one of the most predictable things we have. If you look at things like Moore's law and Metcalfe's law, those are laws, people follow them. And if you look out, we're going to have more cheaper storage. And so storage, it's going to be trivial to keep your entire life 5 times over or 100 times over. We know the curve there. What we don't know, and what's really hard to predict, is the interaction of those technologies with society. And I think we're seeing some of that today, but it's not new. I recall very vividly in, I think it was 1991, when on the internet, the NSFNet made a call, and they said, we're going to change our acceptable use policy, and we're going to allow commercial traffic on NSFNet. That was a day in like March or something. And I was at Next at the time, and we were paying attention to that because we were able to play in the education market with the internet, but here was coming, we had our eye on the enterprise, a lot more money there. And it was actually a day where they said, okay, we're going to change our acceptable use policy. You can now do commercial stuff on the internet. It was a day and time. Fast forward, here we are, and you almost have governments saying the opposite. They're saying, well, we let you play around for a long time here, but it's so ubiquitous and so important to how society operates that maybe we need to take back some control that we gave you back in 1991. I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think that's one of the things that's playing out right now.
Yeah, and I want to get back to this notion of government coming in and new regulatory frameworks. But even before that, in terms of saying, wow, we should pull back and look at what we've done so far, I mean, maybe Ashton, you can weigh in a little bit, because at least with the work on Thorn, you're day in and day out addressing with what we've unleashed, whether unintended consequences or fully predictable, downside of some of the positives that have come from the internet.
Yeah, I think, technology is just a tool. It's a really effective tool and a highly efficient tool. And so, and I think the people who build these things generally build them with a lot of sunshine on the horizon, and the assumption that, well, no one would use the tool for, this or that, or even just a blind spot to the ways that people could use these tools. So I'm kind of going to jump on the regulatory bomb grenade on the floor here. But I look at, things like crypto, and I think a lot of the innovation that's going to come is probably just sitting in plain sight today, but people aren't necessarily using it the right way. Crypto could be one of those things, but I look at the work that we do to find child pornography on the internet and human trafficking victims. Crypto's going to, I can tell you right now, if crypto is started, as it's being utilized for payment exchange today, once file storage is on the blockchain, the issue becomes even more complicated. And I think that the real danger is we have all this regulatory pushback right now around our personal privacy and our data, which I think in many cases is valuable and important. And I'm a privacy advocate, being that I've lived my life in public for about 20 years. I understand the value of privacy. But at the same time, if the technology companies that are building these things don't regulate themselves, the kickback goes, okay, well, you're going to come after us for privacy issues and data issues, so we'll go to full encryption, and therefore we won't know what's being exchanged on our platform. Therefore, we advocate our responsibility for what's being exchanged on our platform. That is going to be the response, and that is the response. And when that happens, because we're protecting privacy, we're not really protecting the privacy of the child that's being molested, and that footage is being exchanged across the internet and across the platform that you created. We're not protecting their privacy at all. So I think that companies need to take the responsibility of protecting that kid's privacy in the same way that they protect general users' privacy as well, and not advocate themselves by going, it's a full encryption for everything without a backdoor, I think now there's a dangerous line that comes with that as well, where you go, okay, well, privacy is important, here's our sort of regulatory overbody, and what we think should be exposed and not exposed. But then you go to other countries, and they have an entirely different, this issue is not complicated by any means. But at the same time, I think that it's something that companies need to take responsibility for. Otherwise, regulators are, and they're going to cut with a hatchet and not a scalpel.
Yeah. Mark, do you find yourself looking at companies differently? Like, there's obviously whether government will step in and put in policy, but even how companies are trying to change themselves, whether it's a business model change or whether it's a set of standards that are evolving. I mean, does that influence how you even consider the likelihood of success?
Yeah, of course. I think companies have got to be more aware of all the external issues beyond their top lines and their bottom lines, because those are starting to have a greater impact on their workforce, on their customer base, who are paying more attention to those issues than, back in the day, if you will, 5 years ago or earlier. It was just like, do I want to use this product? Do I want to be on this platform? Do I want to make this purchase? Now is, okay, well, what does this brand mean to me? Maybe I'll pay a little bit more for somebody else. Maybe I won't go on Facebook. Maybe, Facebook's employees are going to take up the same mantra that I've been taking up in terms of responsibility. And so, we even see it on Shark Tank. Companies that come in, they all have a social component. It's not just, here's my product, here's the price, do you want to buy it, yes or no? It's, here's my product, here's what we're doing, not just for our customers, but here's how I want to impact the world. It may be donating, blankets. It may be building schools. It may be donating desks, whatever it is. But all that goes into defining how the company operates. And yes, you have to pay attention to that. And how they adapt and deal with technology, and how they accept regulation or fight back regulation or view regulation, how they interpret their social construct and their impact. All those things are part of the equation.
So Meg, drawing on your experience, look, it's hard enough when you've got a company that's growing like crazy. You have all the challenges of scaling. You've got pressures you didn't anticipate. And in today's day and age, it now feels like there's this additional component that's probably a primary component you weren't necessarily having to work through, or it just wasn't front and center before. How would you even imagine, like say either you are working with your company now, but even advising more broadly, do you think that's doable? It sounds great, but if the economics aren't working and you have that really tough choice, how do you even think about that?
So I think this is, in some way, the lessons learned here in the last decade are the same lessons we learned 2 or 3 decades ago, which is when you are starting a company or when you are working in a company or you are leading a company, you actually have to start with the core mission and values of what you are going to do. And we started a company here in LA about a year and a half ago. And one of the very first things we did was lay out the mission and lay out the values. And the core value is, what's the right thing to do? Like in the cold, hard light of day. And people say, well, everyone has different values. How would you figure it out? And normally what I say is, if your mother was sitting in the room, or someone you loved dearly, or the person who's closest to you were sitting in the room and watching the decisions that you made, would you be proud? And if that doesn't work, think about it on the front of the New York Times or the LA Times.
Yeah.
But now, Meg, now you got to ask the question: does your mom or your grandmother watch Fox News? Or do they watch
I'm going to leave the politics out of that to some degree. But I will say, Oh
no, he was just talking about media, not politics.
Well, they're sort of the same now, aren't they?
Right.
But what I would say is, honestly, and I'll give you a perfect example. So we are a subscription plus advertising platform called Quibi. And so because advertisers want to know data around our users, what is your data policy? And we had to say very early on what our data policy was, and then go out to the advertisers and stick to it. And a number of things that we decided not to do were not popular necessarily with our advertisers. We are not sharing device IDs of our users. Every advertiser on the planet wants device IDs because they want to do frequency capping. They want to know they want to build their own database that they can market to, and they need device ID. And we simply said no. Will that potentially depress our advertising revenues a little bit? Maybe. We sold out our year 1 advertising. It seems to be okay. But you have to take stands, and you have to stick to those stands when there's a tremendous amount of incoming. And that's just the lesson of doing this for 30 years now.
Yeah, up until a couple days ago, I was going to say, figuratively speaking, we've got a lot of fires burning right now, right? But literally and figuratively.
Literally.
The question is, breakthroughs that if you in each of your respective roles, you're saying, like, boy, if some we're about to see some technology come that will fundamentally change what I'm able to do, how I think about privacy, healthcare-related issues, and things we could be taking on. Is there anything on the horizon or that you're rooting for? Now let's get to the technology piece going, we're almost there, or is this really now trying to kind of digest what we've already got and deal with a bunch of these issues we've already been talking about? Like Preethi, for example, is it pretty much the roadmap ahead, or you can see something going, it will fundamentally change when this next generation technology comes along? Anything like that?
Personally, I think it's the latter. I think technology is cool. Like Ashton said, it's a tool. What I'm passionate about, again, is kind of how do we organize ourselves and build a technology that's more beneficial than harmful? Because it's you can always do good or bad with a tool. And going back to sort of the business model stuff, I think what's interesting personally about crypto is it kind of completely changes the paradigm of how you build a business. So for example, with TruStory, I think the future of a lot of these networks are going to be co-op networks. And that's what blockchain really does. So my company, we have the team, we have our users, we have our investors, we have our validators, and all of us are sort of building this business together, and we all own a part of this business, and we all capture the value in the business. And like, that was never done before, and if you actually look at the stats, like co-ops have existed for hundreds of years, and if you actually look at the stats, like co-ops are way more resilient than traditional companies. So they did a study in 2007 where apparently co-ops, after 5 years, 90% of co-ops after 5 years survive. Compared to traditional businesses, it's a 3 to 5% rate of survival. And why is that? It's because everyone is sort of, has a risk, shares the risk and the reward in that company and that network. And so it's a much more longer process to build a co-op network, which is why some of these crypto projects are going to take a really long time to launch and get right. But I think it's much more resilient in the long run. And for example, another stat is like credit unions were 5 times more likely to survive in a financial crisis than like traditional banks. And I think like what crypto does is like moves us towards that co-op type of networks versus like the traditional stuff.
I think there's some. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to, I'll get to the technology, but I was going to come back a little bit to, I think every company needs to look at stuff beyond the top and bottom line. And, you know, one of the approaches, Apple, I think, has an unfair advantage there. We build personal products. One of the touchstones we use is we don't build anything that we ourselves and our family and our friends won't really love. Now, if you're building a product for some other market, you don't always have that kind of a touchstone to go off of. So I think you have to take those effects into account when you're building technology, when you're building products.
Can I ask a question relative to that? Just relative to that?
Sure.
So, and this isn't, should I ask this or not? Okay, so here's my question. So you take it very seriously, and meanwhile, Apple Messenger has, you know, transfers 3 trillion messages last year. So Facebook's taking the brunt of this privacy conversation right now around the issue that I'm focused on. But Facebook, I think on their Messenger, they reported like 12 million child pornography files to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children last year. And Apple reported 43. And had an order of magnitude more messages that were sent across their messenger. So on one side of the equation, you go protecting user data privacy. Apple's the best best in class without a question. But on the other side of that equation, you look at if you just extrapolate the number of files that Facebook reported versus the number of files that Apple reported, Apple would have theoretically reported like 300 million child pornography files if it's the same volume on either platform. So I don't think that anybody can advocate themselves as the good actors across the board, because I think it's extraordinarily nuanced how, you know, you go, what do you want your kids and your family using? I want my kids and family using the one that's going to report if there's something happening with my kids and family on this thing, but not sell my information to you know, Cambridge Analytica on that thing, right? So I think these conversations around how we regulate ourselves as companies are extraordinarily nuanced, and nobody does everything right.
And those are the right conversations. Those are the right conversations to have. You know, you can get into, I mean, details like, well, Apple's not actually a social network. Making
Messenger's a social network, man. I have like group messages that are pretty effective. So I'm not.
But along those lines, Ashton, so what about SMS? Right? Who takes responsibility for monitoring SMS? Because that is the ultimate ubiquitous application, right?
Same great question. And by the way, that is, I think Messenger is now a social network, and for us to not call it a social network is probably wrong.
So a good point, and SMS is a good point too. Email is a good point. And so, but getting back to,
I really didn't plan on talking about that, and I apologize. I'm not.
So there are serious issues. I do think there are some issues that we are totally underestimating and going to be blindsided by. And getting to Meg's comment about data, I think AI, which is not only on the horizon, AI is here. And the impact of AI on society is going to be huge. And not all companies are thinking ahead enough, I think, in that
I'll give you an example of AI in healthcare, which is, are there any radiologists in the room? So,
Nope, it doesn't look like anyone raised their hand, so you're good.
So, as it turns out, machines can analyze X-rays, MRIs, CAT scans much better, much more effectively than actual humans. And they can do it in seconds, not 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And the accuracy is remarkable. And so you're going to see a whole field of medicine that is completely disrupted, because in the end, we may need some very senior radiologists, but we're not going to need the number of radiologists that we have. And this story is going to be told over and over and over again. And so the dislocation of that to people's livelihoods and jobs and how society works, I think is going to be pretty remarkable.
And that'll be in dental as well. But,
yes.
but there's a shiny side to that if you go, well, that means just job losses across the board, which you go, it's sort of new profession of dataologists that can actually look at the collective of your genome, your blood test, your this, your that, and actually read it effectively to a doctor in a way that can be consumed and understood.
Yes.
So while it'll wipe out radiology in large part, it will actually create, somebody's going to have to be able to read these to doctors.
And by the way, it's better, it's more accurate reading, right? So it's better for your healthcare. I'm just saying that how do we manage society through these enormous shifts in how people make their living?
I mean, I agree across the board that AI is as impactful as any technology ever will be, right? No question about it. It dwarfs everything that we've grown up with.
But we're talking about narrow AI here, not general AI.
No, I'm not talking about smarter machines or, sentient machines. But at the same time, and going back to what Meg said, how you choose data to use to train your models is going to upset the apple cart. Because if you don't have the right radiologists evaluating the data that you input into your models, you're going to kill people. Right? If you don't have the right people choosing the right data to analyze those messages, you might exclude babies of color, right? Who aren't protected nearly as much. So in terms of job maintenance and creation, there's going to be a huge need for soft skills. Because unless you understand how to choose the right data, whether that data is fair and unbiased, and whether you have domain expertise in order to conclude that it's fair and unbiased, your AI is going to be an abomination, and it's going to hurt a lot more than it helps. And we haven't started to address those types of issues. And to your point, for smaller companies in particular, they're looking for shortcut tools, and there really are none. And it becomes more and more difficult. So more data can make you smarter, but it can also work against you.
And then on top of that, you have to store that data in a way that is ethical and regulatory compliant, not just in the U.S., but around the world.
And even on top of that, you have to train that data in a way that doesn't cost so much economically, and from a green perspective, that you're really taking steps backwards and contributing to climate change.
And you have to be aware.
Okay, but before we leave data, before we leave data and get to climate change, it's a perfect opportunity to throw an audience question. Okay, so a question from the audience will play right into some of the stuff we've just been talking about with data in mind. How does the panel feel about a paradigm shift in which the consumer truly owns their own data and business is required to purchase it from them? Starting with, is that feasible? Yeah. And then what do you think of it?
I mean, I think people have this pipe dream that one person's data is valuable to a company. Data is only valuable in aggregates. So I think that's just not going to happen. But I do think I think users don't want to. What I've noticed in our users is they don't want us to collect their data. Like, we're seeing that mind shift change, and it's amongst the fringes of users, but the smart users are saying, like, I don't want to use your application if you're going to collect this data. And so how do we work around that as a company is the big question that I think every company will have, because users are going to get smart. And I just don't know. I mean, maybe there can be, like, literally businesses built around collecting these data in aggregates and then reselling it. Like, but then you come back to, like, what we already do today. So I I really
I think
question
we have those today, and people aren't thrilled with them. So, so anybody else thoughts on is that?
I would actually wonder, what would Quibi do if Quibi said to its users, this is your data, how do you want us to use it, as opposed to setting a corporate policy? And this is a genuine question.
Yeah, yeah. No, listen, I mean, I think I tend to think of this as you can ask a large group of users, and they can tell you how they want their data to be used. But ultimately, at scale, you probably have to have some policies that allow people to opt in or opt out of your service.
But in terms of an individual's data being of value, I think there is, right? Because just look at all the affiliate networks that are out there that'll pay, $10 or $20 or $50 for a lead to get me to subscribe to one service over another or one credit rating over another. And instead of having to have my data pushed through that affiliate network, just show me the list. Here's my data, and I'll provide it to you. You just pay me because obviously you think it's worth something. And so I think how it's monetized and what the business model is, I think you're right, that's going to be more difficult. And how you tokenize it and capture it, that'll be very difficult. How you encrypt it, now you're supposed to say, and then.
Well, and then, I have something to say about everything. And by the way, it's actually like this. And then. Dude, where's my car reference? I apologize. But I think there's a version of this where if the company's value is the data they have, it's not just the raw data they have, it's how they organize the data. But if there's an assumption that some of that data is my data that you're utilizing to make your business model better, maybe there's a model around businesses that says, okay, you're utilizing the fractional value of your data set that is mine, I should be compensated for. And that model would then basically open up co-ownership of, or a co-op, if you will, of that collective company. Now, but the data itself, like my genome data, is probably valuable to the company that I did my sample with, which I won't say. But the way they organize that data and then what they do with it and how they extract value out of it, that's work that the company's doing, right? So I think people have this misnomer that, well, my data is making that company so much more valuable. Yes, fractionally, but the way they organize it and what they do with it and how they do that, that's work that the company's doing.
I think, a major problem for compensating people for their data is that today one of the problems we have with privacy is people simply do not understand the implications of sharing their data. It's an asymmetric marketplace.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that can be solved because the implications of me sharing my data, whether it's my habits or my DNA, the implications of that are always changing because people are inventing new things to do with my data. So how do I make a fair trade decision about my data?
I'll simplify it. If there's any data of mine that anybody out there wants, Venmo me an offer, and I'll tell you if I accept it.
You'll put a price on it.
We'll create a marketplace, and we'll see.
Pretty glad Venmo's part of PayPal now.
Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. You can PayPal it to me as well.
No, I'm indifferent at this point.
Okay, I'm going to try to hit two more questions here. One, we'll try to make it a fairly quick discussion. I'm not sure if that's possible, but what one regulation would you support, if any, to minimize dark uses of technology?
Minimize what?
Dark uses of technology.
Dark uses.
And the question is, it's kind of implying not thrilled with the idea of necessarily leaning on regulation as the solution, but are there regulations that you would say, yep, it just makes sense to put back in the box some of the things that are out there today? Okay, so the next question, whoever asked that, I got it out there. Let me move.
The problem with that, so it's a good question because it's a hard question, but the problem with it is the same methodology that's being utilized for a lot of the dark uses of the web is actually being used by freedom fighters over here, right? And it's a lot of the same methodology that we see. Like if I want to unpack like how someone's sharing a child pornography file, a lot of the stuff that we do is look at like, how would somebody in a hyper-oppressed country actually report on a corruption in that country? And it's very similar, it's tactically very similar. So it's not easy to sort of lay down a regulation, which I think is why we're having such a hard time figuring all of this out.
Yeah, it's the question on Twitter. Do you use real names? Should they require real names? Well, in one case, it'd be great. You'd probably, minimize a lot of the hate on there. But on the flip side, if somebody really has something they want to disclose that's important, you wouldn't have had the Arab Spring if everybody had to disclose their real name. So it's not an easy question.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick lightning round here to push you guys a little bit on what is your breakthrough disruption you see coming. Again, so people are looking to say, what are we thinking about now? I mean, we've talked a lot about the issues. It can be the thing you're pushing on, you want to encourage people to work on, or you see coming right away. We kind of named it, or we've talked about a bunch of the issues, but is there anything specific where you say, beyond the data part, they've acknowledged that. Anything else? Have we missed anything? I mean, I know you're working a lot on privacy and probably how it pertains with healthcare. We've had that come up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Anything that you put out there saying, look, I'm predicting it now, it's coming? Or is this, right now it seemed like it's fairly incremental and it's about digesting and dealing with what we've got because it's an unconstrained set of technologies already?
Well, so I'm going to give a slightly different answer. As I mentioned before, I think the technology is all around us today. It's kind of predictable. There's going to be more of it. It's going to be faster. It's going to be higher scale. The interaction with society is harder to predict. I will say we have not yet suffered a huge worldwide cyber disaster. Mm-hmm. And I think as such, we're probably underestimating, we're like the frog being boiled, we're probably underestimating how dependent we are actually becoming on the internet and that communication and those devices. I was, up in the fire and blackout area, and guess what? The website that told me, is my house going to be blacked out was down because they didn't provision it.
Right.
And it was like, how could that happen these days? Well, that kind of thing on a much bigger scale is yet to happen, but probably will. And I think one of the results will be this more government saying, hey, we can't have that stuff going on. We're going to come back in and regulate more. I think it may be regulated on a national basis. It'll be balkanizing. So I think I don't want to say on the dark side, those are going to be big challenges.
Got it. Okay, two last really, I think, quick ones. One, I think this is just for crowd-pleasing purposes. With entertainment a common focus of the panelists, whether it's Meg or Ashton or Mark, what are some disruptions that you see in entertainment and sports? They keep popping this up
I'll
like
take
they
that.
want to ask it.
Listen, everyone knows this in LA because this is ground zero for esports and gaming. But I've never seen anything. I lived in a world of up and to the right in Silicon Valley for many years. I've never seen numbers like this. This is straight up.
Domestic or global?
Global.
Right,
global.
Not domestic.
It's extraordinary. I mean, it's growing massively here, but you look at Brazil and China and Korea.
Globally it's huge.
I've never seen anything like this. And I'm not sure what the implications of that are, but I've never seen something that's relatively new take off this fast. I mean, Call of Duty had 100 million downloads in 2 hours. Yeah. I mean, it's just the numbers are extraordinary. So I see that as an enormous trend, and how does one tap into that? And then obviously in my little startup, we're trying to bring very high quality, Hollywood quality content to mobile phone and have your mobile phone turn into a great way to watch video.
I'll jump back to your last question.
Well, the last question is, what's Mark Cuban's Venmo?
No.
So I think I was going to hold that from.
I think I have it. Hold on. I pay this guy for everything.
Okay, all right. You're good.
But your previous question, okay. I've actually seen evidence in simulation on some quantum computing that has reduced error rates pretty effectively. And if that trend continues, that's a paradigm shift for all of this, a significant paradigm shift for all of this. So that could be on the horizon. The evidence I saw was pretty compelling enough for me to open up a checkbook, and in something that I otherwise probably wouldn't have. So I think that's really interesting. I think the other thing is if we want to find where the horizon of technology is, all we have to do is look for the horizon of problems that we have. And sometimes it's the most trivial utilization of technology to solve very hard problems. If I look at like college debt, the college debt crisis in the country, there's over $1 trillion of college debt in this country. This ISA model that's starting to take off, I think it's really interesting, and it's enabled by technology. If I look at healthcare, even just healthcare payments, there's new companies that are enabling this stuff to happen slicker, easier, better. Just anything that we look at where we go, God, this is just an awful experience. I think that there's room for an entrant, and it doesn't have to be quantum, right? It doesn't have to be crypto. Sometimes it can just be the things
it's just
that
a
we
really
have.
simple thing. I'll give you a perfect example. Food insecurity,
Yep.
right? So there's a company that I invested in, and they create these little cubes that are calorie dense, nutrient dense, and cost $2 to $3 to provide 400 calories. And so you hand out these cubes to kids anywhere around the world, and now all of a sudden they're not eating, but they're eating. And now they're not malnourished. And it's not advanced technology, it was very simple technology, but it just takes someone, to Ashton's point, saying, well, this is a real problem, is there a simple solution? And sometimes there is.
Well, given that I think we are out of time, what I want to do is take a minute and just thank all of you. It's been a broad-ranging conversation, and I think I think you couldn't have summarized it better in terms of the idea that the technology combined with problem identification right now is kind of the challenge in front of us. So can everybody join me in thanking the panel here today?
All right, thanks, Alan. Let's take our last poll question before lunch. We'll get it up there. So, in one word, can you define the most exciting new opportunity or disruption for the internet in whatever time frame you like? But we're going to make a word cloud out of this one. And shortly thereafter, we're going to break for lunch. Pat will be back here in just a minute. I also want to mention the Twitter hashtag is Internet50. Here we go. All right. We haven't really talked about quantum yet. We'll get to that later in the day. And we'll let that develop. Pat, if you would.
And then, this news, you'll want to hear it. Not only did the internet start in LA, but so did food trucks, now that I have your attention. So we're going to break for lunch until 1 o'clock. We're going to start at 1 o'clock whether you're here or not. I know it sounds mean, but we thought it would be fun for you to experience another part of Los Angeles life. The food trucks are out there. There may be a soft taco ware with your name on it somewhere out there. So if you are going out there, please take Jan's Way, steps down to Wilson Plaza, exit to the right as you go out, and you'll find food trucks for everyone. If you are invited to the lunch reception at the Dixon Court North, as you go out, turn left as you leave, and we will see you back here on the dot at 1 for a performance of The Evolution of the Internet by DJ Spooky in the UCLA School of Music. Bon appetit!